This video explores the unsettling case of Rachel Morin, a 37-year-old mother of 5 whose abrupt disappearance in August 2023 sent shockwaves through Maryland. What began as a routine missing person search quickly evolved into a chilling mystery involving a fugitive on a cross-country crime spree. A random encounter and a devastating conclusion no one anticipated. There were no cries for help. No alarms were triggered, just a quiet wooded trail that held its secrets until the following afternoon. Rachel Morin was last seen at the Mon Pot Rail in Belle during a standard evening run. The evening appeared uneventful. What happened next would fracture her family, weigh heavily on the community, and launch one of the United States' most meticulous homicide investigations in history. Rachel had been building a life for her children and had recently started a new relationship. Neighbors knew her as a hardworking business owner. Friends sensed her strength. They knew her resilience, even if they didn't know the level of danger lurking in the shadows that day. It all unfolded on Saturday, August 5th, 2023. The day began as a routine weekend for Rachel Morin. She spent the morning and afternoon managing the demands of her household and her business, adhering to a schedule that was typical for a busy mother of 5. There was no indication of conflict or unusual activity in the hours leading up to her departure. As the summer heat began to fade into the evening, she prepared for her usual exercise routine and jogged along the Mon Pot Rail, a popular wooded path in Bel Air that locals frequently used for recreation. At approximately 6:58 p.m., Rachel arrived at the Williams Street trailhead. She parked her car, a standard action that signaled the start of a brief window of personal time before returning to her family. Witnesses and digital data indicate she appeared focused on routine in her movements. She stepped onto the trail as the sun began its descent, likely expecting to be back at her vehicle within the hour. The ghost timeline of what should have occurred stands in stark contrast to the digital evidence recovered later. Around 8 p.m., Rachel should have arrived home to her children. Instead, forensic data from her phone and smart watch revealed that the window of normalcy was shattered almost immediately. Hours passed as the Mon Pot Rail grew dark. Back at home, the initial confusion over her delay sharpened into genuine alarm. At 11:20, for hours after Rachel was expected to return, her boyfriend, Richard Tobin, contacted the Harford County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. He informed dispatchers that her failure to return or answer texts was completely out of character. By the time the first patrol cars arrived at the trailhead to locate her abandoned vehicle, the window for a safe return had already started feeling slim. The search for Rachel Morin began in the early morning hours of Sunday, August 6, as volunteers and law enforcement descended on the Mon Pot Rail. For hours, the atmosphere was one of frantic hope, with teams scanning the thick, brush and heavy summer canopy, praying for a sign that she had simply been injured or lost her way. That hope held until 1:07 p.m., when the nature of the mission underwent a sudden, violent shift. Evan Knapp, a volunteer who had joined the search effort, stepped off the main path and onto a narrow deer track near a drainage culvert, near the entrance of a storm drain. Knapp discovered a large rock, its surface heavily stained with blood. Moments later, he looked into the dark interior of the culvert and saw the unmistakable shape of a human body. Immediately, a 911 call was placed. Law enforcement arrived to find a scene that Harford County Sheriff Jeffrey G. Uller would later describe as leaving no doubt that a homicide had occurred. Rachel had been beaten so severely that her face was unrecognizable to the man who found her. She had been dragged roughly 150 feet from the trail, hidden away in a place where the perpetrator likely thought she wouldn't be found for days. As the area was cordoned off with yellow tape and forensic teams and white suits began their meticulous work. The energy of the investigation transformed. The desperate hunt for a killer had begun. Investigators knew they were looking for a predator who had been watching the trail, waiting for the perfect 6-minute window to strike. The discovery of the body provided the where and the how, but it left a terrifying void where the who should be. Investigators began by treating the wooded trail like a puzzle where most of the pieces were missing. The first step was the collection of biological evidence. Forensic teams successfully extracted a DNA profile from Rachel's body, a profile that would ultimately be found on every single piece of evidence gathered at the scene. While forensics worked the lab, detectives focused on the most immediate circle of people in Rachel's life. Suspicion naturally fell on Richard Tobin, the boyfriend who had reported her missing and who possessed a criminal record. Detectives conducted extensive interviews, but the investigative loop hit a sudden plot. Tobin was fully cooperative, surrendering both his cell phone and a DNA sample to prove his innocence. With the boyfriend cleared, the search widened. A team of 10 investigators began scrubbing through 200 tips that poured in from a community now paralyzed by fear. They identified and questioned a group of 5 individuals who had been on the trail at the time of the murder, hoping one of them had seen a face or heard a struggle. Despite these efforts, the trail remained cold. There was no murder weapon, no immediate witness to the abduction, and no local matches for the DNA found at the scene. The investigation seemed to be stalling until a notification arrived from the Combined DNA Index System (CODIS). The DNA from the Maryland crime scene didn't match a person, but it did match another crime, a violent home invasion and assault on a mother and her 9-year-old daughter in Los Angeles, California, 5 months earlier. The discovery created a massive geographic hurdle. Why would a suspect from a March home invasion in Southern California be lurking in a Maryland park in August? To bridge this gap, the Harford County Sheriff's Office released doorbell camera footage from the Los Angeles incident. The video showed a muscular, dark-haired man leaving the California home, shirtless and carrying his shoes. For the first time, investigators had a face to match the DNA, but they still didn't have a name. The suspect was a ghost traveling across the country, leaving a trail of violence that seemed impossible to predict. As the investigation stalled, detectives were forced to reconcile a detail that seemed physically impossible. The timeline. Digital forensic data from Rachel's phone and smartwatch narrowed the entire violent encounter down to a window of just 4 to 6 minutes. In that brief span, the perpetrator had managed to abduct her from the trail, drag her 115 feet into a culvert, commit a brutal sexual assault, and beat her to death with such force that a blood-stained rock was left at the scene. The speed and precision of the attack suggested a level of planning and familiarity that typically points to a targeted victim. Yet, every lead into Rachel's personal life came back clean. There was no ex with a grudge, no suspicious co-workers, and no known stalkers. The impossible detail was this: how could a crime so efficient and seemingly premeditated be carried out by someone with absolutely no connection to the victim? Detectives spent months scrubbing through grainy footage and analyzing thousands of data points, trying to understand how a ghost could strike with such lethal accuracy in a town he didn't live in. They were looking for a local predator, but the DNA was screaming a different story, one that led 3,000 miles away to a residential burglary in Los Angeles. This contradiction, a random stranger acting with the cold efficiency of a calculated stalker, became the central anomaly of the case. It was a detail that defied the standard logic of criminal profiling. For 10 months, the profile of Rachel Morin killer was nothing more than a DNA sequence and a grainy doorbell video from a different time zone. The breakthrough that finally gave the ghost a name came on June 14, 2024, at a bar in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Acting on a tip and months of forensic genealogy, law enforcement located 23-year-old Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez. When he was approached by detectives, he gave a false name, but the biometric evidence was undeniable. Victor Martinez Hernandez was not a local resident of Bel Air, nor was he a casual visitor. He was a fugitive, born in El Salvador. He had fled his home country in early 23 after an arrest warrant was issued for the murder of another young woman. According to investigative records, he entered the United States illegally in February 2023, having been apprehended and released by border officials 3 separate times because his international criminal history had not yet been logged in shared databases. He had spent the months between his entry and Rachel's murder moving across the country, allegedly committing a violent home invasion and assault in Los Angeles before eventually making his way to Maryland. The connection between Martinez Hernandez and Rachel Morin was non-existent. There were no shared friends, no digital interactions, and no previous encounters. This was the realization that terrified the community. Rachel had been targeted simply because she was there. The motive remains a subject of investigation and theory, framed by the sheer randomness of the attack. Martinez Hernandez had no job in the area and no known reason to be on the Mon-Pot rail that Saturday, leading investigators to believe he was a transient predator who chose the trail specifically for its secluded sections on easy exit points. In the months following the murder, Martinez Hernandez did not hide in a basement or flee back across the border. He moved to Oklahoma, where he attempted to blend into a new community, presumably waiting for the heat of the investigation to die down. He lived as if the DNA he left behind in Maryland and California didn't exist. This period of quiet deception formed the basis of the prosecution's argument that he was not a man who acted in a momentary lapse of reason, but a calculated individual who knew exactly how to evade capture. Using the forensic data recovered from Rachel Morin's phone and the biological evidence left at the scene, investigators were able to reconstruct the final minutes of her life with clinical precision. On August 5, 2023, Rachel stepped onto the Mon-Pot rail at 6:58 p.m. Her smartwatch recorded a steady, rhythmic pace for the first few minutes of her jog. At exactly 7:04 p.m., that rhythm was violently disrupted. The physical evidence indicates that the struggle began on a relatively open stretch of the path. DNA found on the surface of the trail and nearby foliage suggests that Victor Martinez Hernandez emerged from the brush and immediately overpowered her. There were no defensive wounds reported that suggested a prolonged fight. Instead, the evidence points to a rapid, overwhelming assault designed to silence the victim instantly. Between 7:04 and 7:10 p.m., all purposeful movement recorded by her devices ceased. This 6-minute window is where the perpetrator dragged Rachel roughly 150 feet down an embankment and toward the darkness of a concrete drainage culvert. The reconstruction of the crime scene within the culvert tells a story of visceral intensity. Forensic analysis of the blood-stained rock found at the scene confirms it was used as the primary weapon. The positioning of the blood spatter and the location of the body indicated that Martinez Hernandez used the rock to inflict catastrophic blunt force trauma, ensuring Rachel could not cry out or escape. The presence of his DNA on the rock, on Rachel's body, and throughout the immediate area of the culvert provides a forensic map of his movements. It reveals a sequence where the victim was incapacitated, sexually assaulted, and then murdered with a level of aggression that investigators noted was consistent with someone who had committed similar acts before. This reconstruction is anchored by the impossible detail identified earlier in the investigation: the speed of the attack, moving a grown woman 150 feet, completing a lethal assault in under 10 minutes required a perpetrator with specific physical capabilities and a total lack of hesitation. The DNA match from the Los Angeles home invasion proves that Martinez Hernandez was that person. In California, he had successfully broken into a home and attacked a mother and child. In the Naman Rio, he applied that same predatory instinct to a stranger. The evidence proves that the reconstruction is not just a theory, but a documented sequence of a fugitive using a public park as a hunting ground. The legal proceedings for the murder of Rachel Moore began in a Harford County courtroom on April 1st, 2025. The air was thick with the presence of Rachel's family, who sat inches away from Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez, the man accused of shattering their lives. For 14 days, the prosecution methodically laid out their theory of the crime, presenting Martinez Hernandez not as a lost wanderer, but as a serial predator who used the nation's borders and back trails to hunt. While the defense attempted to cast doubt on the chain of custody and the circumstantial nature of the witness sightings, they had no answer for why his genetic material was found inside a Maryland drainage culvert on a blood-stained rock. Throughout the trial, Martinez Hernandez's demeanor was a point of focus for those in the gallery. He remained largely stoic, showing little emotion as the graphic details of Rachel's final moments were read into the record. This lack of remorse became a focal point during the sentencing phase on August 11. Rachel's mother, Patty Morin, addressed the court, describing the 2-year journey from the moment she was told her daughter's body had been found to the cold reality of the courtroom. She spoke of the need for a funeral worthy of Rachel's beauty, a stark contrast to the brutal conditions in which she was found. In the months following the identification of Victor Martinez Hernandez, the case became a focal point in a national debate regarding United States immigration policy. Harford County Sheriff Jeffrey G. Aller publicly cited the case as a failure of the immigration system, noting that the lack of international criminal database sharing allowed a documented fugitive to enter and remain in the country. This tragedy has since prompted calls for more robust vetting processes and improved communication between international law enforcement agencies to prevent similar occurrences. For the community of Bel Air, the trial and sentencing provided a formal resolution, but the human cost continues to resonate. Rachel's 5 children are being raised by their family, carrying the weight of a loss that has permanently altered their lives. Her mother, Patty Morin, has remained a public advocate for her daughter's memory, marking the anniversaries of her death by emphasizing Rachel's identity as a devoted mother and a hardworking business owner. The trail where the attack occurred has seen the installation of safety improvements and serves as a site of remembrance, where community members frequently leave tributes to ensure Rachel is remembered for her life rather than the violence that ended it. Rachel's legacy is anchored in the resilience of her family and a community that refused to let her case go unsolved. Her death forced a realization that the systems meant to protect the public are only as effective as the information they possess. Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez was sentenced to 2 back-to-back life terms, plus an additional 40 years, ensuring he would never walk free again. But as the legal battle concluded, a new question emerged. Could any amount of time behind bars truly heal a family or community that had seen its sense of safety so violently uprooted? The case of Rachel Morin is a documented account of how systemic gaps can have lethal consequences in a quiet community. It serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice does not end with a verdict, but continues in the efforts to ensure such a failure of safety never happens again. We invite you to share a message of respect for Rachel's family and her 5 children in the comments, as we remember a life that deserved a future far beyond that Saturday evening. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.